We all set, Joanne? Okay.
Hit record.
Recording in progress.
Before we begin, let me just advise anyone watching who is not present in the room that community members can participate in this meeting either by being physically present or through Zoom. And the link to the Zoom meeting is posted on the district website. This meeting, this in-person meeting, is open to the public. And let me just point out that the Zoom meeting is provided as a convenience, and we can't always guarantee that the audio will be what we would like it to be, or that we won't lose that connection at some point during the meeting, but we do the best we can. We're going to begin with a public hearing tonight before we start the board meeting. So I'm going to open a public hearing on the proposed $10,000 donation from the Byrne Foundation for the Lebanon High School Wrestling Team. Joanne or Tim, do you want to give us some specifics, please?
Certainly, the wrestling team has reached out with a lower donation amount, and we are very grateful for the Byrne Foundation for offering a $10,000 funding source for the wrestling team.
Are there any questions from the board or from the public? Stephen.
Is that donation to the wrestling team restricted in any way, or it's for use as needed by the wrestling team?
For use as needed by the wrestling team.
Great.
Okay, are there any questions from the public via Zoom? Or comments?
I do not see any.
Okay, hearing no further public comment, the public hearing is closed. And we will come back to this later on in the meeting to accept that generous donation from the Byrne Foundation. The meeting is called to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will be permitting public comment during this meeting a little bit later on in the agenda, and that public comment can be received either in person or via Zoom. In additions or deletions from the agenda, we are going to do a little shuffling around of items unless there are objections from the board. And what I propose to do is to move item 10A, discussion on the Seminary Hill building, up in the agenda to right after the student report. So that will be between item 7 and item 8, between the student report and the SAU leadership team update. Also, when we get to the leadership team updates, I'd like to move item C, the report from the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, to the first place, to item A. So we'll do CIA report, and then the superintendent update, and then the BA update. Are there any objections to these changes from the board? Okay, that's what we'll do then. Joanne, are there any other additions or deletions?
None.
Okay. Public comment is now open for any matter on the agenda or anything else that a member of the public wishes to speak to.
I do not see anyone here, and I do not see any hands raised virtually.
Okay, public comment is closed. Correspondence. To my knowledge, we have not received any correspondence, at least via email, since the last meeting. The correspondence folder is empty. Joanne, were there any other forms of correspondence that came in that we should be aware of?
Not to my recollection.
Okay. We'll then move on to the consent agenda. And I think we can bundle these. I'd like a motion, please, to approve the non-public minutes. Let me get the dates on here. Excuse me. Non-public minutes from September 22nd. Public hearing minutes from September 22nd. And the regular school board minutes from September 22nd. May I have a motion to accept those, and then we'll go through with any additions or corrections in turn.
I'll make a motion to approve the non-public minutes from September 22nd, 2021, the public hearing minutes from September 22nd, 2021, and the public minutes from September 22nd, 2021.
Is there a second?
Sure.
Second by Stephen. Okay,
I got it.
yes, go ahead, MJ.
So I think in the packet, we missed the public hearing minutes, but in there it had you calling the meeting to order when it's actually Jenica.
That's right. And I appear, so every place that it mentions me should be Jenica. And I believe there are 4 places. Okay, were there any, I didn't see any, didn't hear you. Go ahead, Stephen.
In the regular district meeting, under 3A, 8B, and 11, there's a spelling mistake in
Yep.
my name.
Yep. So the minute taker will please correct Stephen's name.
And then on 5A for the strategic plan survey results, it said they were heavily represented by MLS parents. I actually think it was LMS parents, but we might need to check with that, but I'm pretty sure it was LMS.
I agree with her.
That
Yeah,
should-
it's only LMS.
Should be Lebanon Middle School.
Correct.
Okay, so that's item 5A. Excuse me, the 5th line. Are there any other corrections? Okay, hearing none. Members, please raise your hand to accept the minutes from the non-public, public hearing, and regular school board meeting. Oh,
You can't vote.
I can't vote. I have to abstain. Lisa, are you okay? So 7 yes, 1 abstention, and that's it since Kristen is not here. So 7-0-1. Okay, student report.
I would like to welcome Miles. Miles, if you'd like to come up and go right to that microphone, that would be fantastic.
My name is Miles Curtis. I am the moderator of LHS Council for the school year. I'm a junior, and the other members of the council administration are Mary Rainey, the assistant moderator, she's a junior as well, and Zoe Chin, the secretary, she's a senior. I want to talk a little bit about student life at the high school right now. It's been amazing this year. Not to say last year was bad, but it was definitely different and interesting, and it's good to see, while not fully back to normal, it's certainly very close, and all the students are feeling very good about that. The energy is very different. Everyone likes that. All the activities and sports are back. There's a lot more co-curricular activity going on, and that's definitely boosting student mood. And I'll talk a little bit about council and what we are doing at the moment. This year we've transitioned to a new council advisor, and she's doing amazing. Her name is Maggie Finn. She's a new social studies teacher at the high school. Our council advisor from last year and many years past stepped down, and she's been doing great. Currently, council is working on, we have a pep rally coming up on Friday for the homecoming football game, and we are looking into pursuing the possibility of a homecoming or winter dance for either this year for winter dance or for future years for homecoming or winter dance, and we're pursuing that with administration. We're planning our council retreat where we, in the past, have gone off site and spent our productive and worked a lot on different things that council has to do at the moment. Another thing we're doing is we're working with Superintendent Roberts and Deo Mwano regarding the district's equity audit. And they will be attending one of our meetings and speaking to the student council regarding such. We're also working with Superintendent Roberts to make the school board's new diversity statement more visible around LHS, and then that will also be a goal for all the other buildings, including the SAU. This idea was originally brought to us by one of our math teachers, Deborah Lafreniere, and she thought after participating in the required suicide training for staff over the summer, she was alarmed at the high rates of suicide and depression among minorities and so people of color and the LGBTQ+ community. And she thought that the new diversity statement was very well written, and council agreed. And so we brought this idea up to Superintendent Roberts, and she was very excited and thought it was a good idea to get the diversity statement around the schools and help people, the students, feel more like they belong and have. And lastly, we're just constantly looking into new ideas for school spirit and moving forward and always looking to for student life at LHS.
Any questions for Miles?
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Well, Miles, thank you. Thank you. Before you go, thank you so much for coming and welcome. We really appreciate having a student rep at the board meetings. And I mean, part of what you do, we hope, is also to carry information back from what goes on at the board meeting to student council. So, you can feel free to hang out through as much or as little of the meeting as you want. Don't feel that you need to come in, talk, and leave. You're welcome to stay. If you have the inclination, stay for the whole night. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks. It was pointed out to me that I skipped over item 6B in the consent agenda. So we need to go back and approve and acknowledge, approve nominations and acknowledge resignations provided by the superintendent. We have one on that list. We have a motion, please, to acknowledge retirement listed on this October 13th list. Moved by Stephen, second by MJ. Are there any questions for the superintendent? Okay, all in favor of, I guess we're just acknowledging this, but let's have a vote anyway, since we have a motion in favor of acknowledging this, please raise your hand. Unanimous. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to move things up now and move to new business item A. And could I ask the representatives from the city, the mayor and the city manager, and I'm trying to know who else is here? Oh, and Paul is here as well. Please, guys, pull up some chairs there. I think we only gave you 2 chairs.
Okay,
And
thank you.
maybe
Thank you for,
we want to make sure that you're on camera, but at the same time, maybe we could pull that table out a little bit so that
Sure,
Sean isn't behind the pole.
sure. Well, thank you for having us here this evening. We've been anxious to talk to you about this issue, which is, I think, extremely important for the city, the district, and for all our inhabitants. Just by way of quick introduction, for those of you who might not know me, I'm Tim McNamara. I'm currently serving as the mayor. I have here with me Assistant Mayor Clifton Belo, Paul Coates, who's our Director of Recreation, Arts and Parks, and City Manager Sean Mulholland. We may see Councilor Jim Winnie here this evening at some point in time. He's one of our Ward 1 councilors, and Ward 1, as you probably know, is West Lebanon. So we've been thinking about this issue of Seminary Hill School building for quite a while now. My own involvement, other than being a proud graduate of Seminary Hill School, goes back to 2014 when a number of us in West Lebanon stood up an ad hoc committee with the idea that perhaps we would be able to convert the school to an arts center at the time. And while that ultimately did not come to fruition for a number of reasons, we did do a very in-depth architectural study of the school. We actually had commissioned an architect with some funds that were donated to us. And so we've got pretty good drawings of the existing conditions at the school. We even had done some drawings specifically with regard to the third floor and conversion of that space to offices for the district. The current proposal that we're offering to you, and it's in detail in our letter to you of June 3rd, is that the city take possession of the property and that we do extensive renovations to the building, both in terms of energy efficiency and just generally bringing it up to a more modern standard and more efficient utilization of the space in that building. And we think that if we can do that, that we could both create a structure that is much more energy efficient than it is today and that actually functions better than it does today. Our initial work from back in 2014 indicated that we would have the ability to fit the entire SAU staff comfortably on the third floor with amenities such as kitchens and bathrooms and things like that. Leaving the remainder of the building open for use, we would like to say, by our Recreation, Arts and Parks Department at the very least. We don't have a presence currently as a city on the west side of town, and we think that that's really important for our West Lebanon residents. And we think that it will really help to re-energize that area of the city, particularly Main Street and West Lebanon. We think that the gym, which is currently actively used by our rec department, can be even more efficiently used. We think that the auditorium could certainly be very efficiently used. We recognize that the school district uses both of those facilities, and you would certainly have first dibs on scheduling. You would become a tenant of ours, and we feel pretty strongly that we can actually get you in there into very comfortable surroundings as a tenant at considerably less than you're paying now to operate the building on an annual basis. So we think it's a potential win-win for everyone. This is a multi-step process, and we recognize that. We know that in order for you to turn the building over to the city and then to enter into a lease with us requires voter approval at the March elections. We think that while the schedule is tight, that is still viable, particularly if you could write your warrant articles in such a way that they basically give the board, the voters give the board the ability to enter into these agreements. That gives us some time to do some studies to convince you that this will work. And it gives you some time to consider our proposals. So I think, in my mind anyway, the first step in this process would be for the board, as expeditiously as possible, to either express an interest in this or not. And if you are sincerely interested in it, we have funds in our budget, and we already have an architect retained for studies relating to a community center, who could go in there immediately using the materials that we accumulated back in 2014, and we think pretty quickly turn out a series of drawings that would show you how we think we could accommodate the district staff in that building with some room left over. We're willing to make that investment. If you are interested in this, if you're sincerely interested in this, we will make the investment and do it. We would try to come back to you as quickly as possible with those drawings for board review and hopefully approval. And again, if we can get that process done, we feel like, at least under our understanding of the law, that you could sort of do a placeholder resolution for the voters in March, asking for them to give you the ability to enter into an agreement with us and to turn the property over to us. So I'm happy to entertain, we're happy to entertain any questions. A lot of the specifics are laid out in our June 3rd letter to you. We'd like to move on this as quickly as possible. There are some sources of funding that we may be able to obtain. And I think we're prepared to make a significant investment in the building. Are there any questions I can answer at this time?
Thanks, Tim. Let's open this up to questions from the board. All right, let me start things off.
Sure.
There's going to be, if this goes forward, there's going to be a significant displacement for a period of time, as you guys went through when you renovated City Hall.
Absolutely.
Do you have any sense for the timeline for the sort of construction retrofit that we're talking about? How long we would have to be seeking alternative? Let's just focus right now on the SAU administrative functions.
Right.
Yeah, any sense for how long we'd be out of our home?
So without approved drawings in hand, that's hard to say, and I'll tag team this a little bit with the city manager. I've done a number of construction projects, as you're probably aware, in my full-time job. And if this were a staged process where potentially we could do some of the envelope improvements and then move on directly to what we think would be the ideal place for the district, which would be the 3rd floor, I would think we're looking at somewhere between 6 and 12 months. Does that seem reasonable to you?
It took us 10 months at City Hall, and the preference is going to be that you're not in there. We made the decision that it's just going to be too disruptive to staff to try to be in there when things are going on. So again, our project took 10 months and we had 5 floors of work. Here we have a smaller space in which to do that. But it also depends on supply chain issues with, as you know, materials and all that. That's who knows what that is as we move into the future here.
And you emptied City Hall out completely during that, didn't you?
It's not completely. There were specific renovations that were made, but it's down to the studs in many cases, and we got to put insulation in. So it's a very extensive overhaul of certain floors of the building.
And there are certain similarities to what we propose to do at Seminary Hill: replacement of the heating system, obviously, improvements to the outer skin of the building. So, windows, insulation, things like that are very similar to what we did at City Hall, with the goal of obviously improving energy efficiency in the long run and also decreasing, our carbon footprint. So that's important to us, very important to us. But I would think, for planning purposes at this stage, I would think you should be plan on being out for 6 months to a year in rented space.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Tammy.
Can you give me a little bit more of insight into in 2014 why you didn't purchase it then? You said a number of reasons. What?
So we weren't even necessarily into a purchase at that point in time. We were a very small 501c3. We didn't have a lot of financial resources, and the question was, do we attempt to purchase? Do we attempt to be tenants? The major interest at the time was really in the auditorium. The core of this group was in the arts, and they really weren't interested in the gym or much of the other space. And after a while, it just became very clear that we were not going to be able to put the resources together to be able to move forward with a meaningful proposal to the district. So it was a good try.
Yeah.
But it was too small a group, unlike the city, where we have significantly more resources.
It's my understanding, I don't know, I think the building is valued at over $1 million in today's market, probably, more than what it was then. So the school would hand this over, and I guess I'm asking you too, essentially, it is the school district's asset for over $1 million. And there's no consideration for that, really? How does that equate?
So the way we look at this, we're all taxpayers.
Mhm.
So we all own the building together. And whether the name at the bottom of the paper is the city of Lebanon or the school district is essentially irrelevant. We'd just be passing money from one side to the other and from one taxpayer pocket to the other. So this works for us at a $0 transfer, basically.
So Tim, is that really, is that really, I'm not a finance person, so I mean, we'd be losing. I mean, I understand it's taxpayers, but there's this city and there's the school district. So we're taking over $1 million from us, moving it over there.
Well, I think the only caveat to that is, when you think of like a business, the business has a bunch of assets. And so we have a property list and it is an asset, but, we're a public entity. So it's, there's no bottom line we're trying to hit as far as, we paid for this asset and we got to get a rate of return on it. So I think that's probably a little different. But it would come off our asset list, right?
And I believe that the city has also in the past turned over some of our assets to the district. Is that correct?
Yeah, can you tell me? Yeah, I asked that.
Yeah, there were several properties that the city turned over to the district at no charge. It was just transferred as it should be.
Do you have what those were?
Bixby and there were 2 other lots. I don't- what was on
Do you know?
Bixby? I looked them up this afternoon.
So Bixby, what, a couple 100,000 maybe?
150,000.
Okay.
175,000.
And the market value for the most recent real estate conversation is $2.2 million for the facility, with much interest in it. The biggest piece is how we use the building consistently, and I've shared information with the city manager. From the outside parking lot, it doesn't look like it's used as much as it is. It's constantly in use, and that's a good thing. Before I became superintendent, it wasn't, and I didn't see why. And so we opened our doors. And beyond the things that, I've mentioned and shared, we just had a situation where a student from a neighboring town, that's one of our area agreements, is working locally and needs a place for special education services and to regroup. And, we have that ability to say, we can work out some space in the conference room for that student to land, because that's who we want to be as a community. And so, when we think about the displacement, we talked about employees, of which we might be a bit larger than we were. What staff numbers did you use in 2014?
They had 19 spaces, but that was based on some very basic, as I say,
Sure.
architectural designs, but they could comfortably fit 19 then.
Mhm.
We were basic drawings.
Yeah.
On the 3rd floor.
And so when we talk about a displacement of, a year plus, we're talking about a displacement of our students for that year plus, and the rec department for that year plus, and all the activities that go on. So careful collaboration with that, because we know there aren't other gyms available, or we'd all be using them, or an auditorium that we can use. So we used to have the wet paint players go over to the Opera House, as you may know. But what happens is we would take up a week of the Opera House where they couldn't bring other venues in. And so our auditorium has become a huge asset for that use. The police and fire department have used the area as well. And we have policies that allow the community to use it. So we are very open to also supporting the arts as well. I think that's something that we definitely share in common. But I just wanted to put forward the amount from the latest real estate. And so it is of value. It's a $2.2 million asset that the school owns.
Right.
And Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, it cost about $140,000 in total a year to run the building.
I think it's important when you look at value, though, to realize that there's a zoning component to that. So that building is a public structure, exists in that zoning district, which I believe is R3, I think. You could not simply convert that building to, for example, multifamily housing or to businesses in the R3 district, because those uses are not allowed. So in order to recognize the full value of that, if you were to sell it to a third party, you would need a zoning change.
Or they would. I mean, they
Or
could
they
purchase it with them
Right.
having to go through you. I just have a couple more if I can. Keep
Of
going.
course.
Is the 3rd floor enough room for everything we need?
I have no idea. I don't have the sketch, so I would literally be putting people in where we are.
Mhm.
What that doesn't include is we now run our adult ELL program out of our library upstairs. That doesn't include that we have an entire room for the Lego robotics and other things that happen in there. We didn't have our tech support back then that we have now that been hired over the last 8 years. So that technology department has definitely expanded quite a bit. And their use of space has expanded quite a bit. When you can imagine, particularly when we went one-to-one remote, all the technology and the devices that we purchased, some are in the schools, some are being repaired within the SAU office. So I just would have to see it and just look at it and take people and put them in. What's interesting in our SAU is that for many reasons, we couldn't do shared offices because there's one person that does one specific thing. But I mean, I'd be happy to look at it and just see how it was laid out.
And again, that's why I see this as a multi-phase process. If there is an interest in the board at potentially doing this, the next stage that we're willing to invest in is to do these studies that the superintendent's discussing, because we can't have a meaningful discussion unless they take place, right? But in order for us to make that investment, we at least want to know that you're sincere about pursuing this if we make that investment.
And for us to be a tenant, we would pay you for
Yes.
that?
Yep.
And
You would pay your share of the operating expenses.
And if I might, that sort of partially addresses the sort of the value proposition, which is there's still a lot of negotiation and work to figure out how this might work. And part of that is essentially the prospect of essentially a life tenancy that actually meets the needs that you currently have and can reasonably foresee. The building is in need of a lot of renovation, just even from the energy efficiency point of view. And that necessarily involves some disruption at some point in time to do those improvements. From my point of view, the public schools are such an essential part of the building of community. It's how families learn literally, but also how they learn and connect and grow as a community. And our Recreation, Arts and Parks Department kind of extends that both as an extension of what the schools do, but extending it to other families who maybe don't have connections to the schools, people who move here afterwards. And it's fairly common that residents, taxpayers don't really understand the difference between the city and the school district. We all know that we're distinct entities. But the question is there an opportunity here, because the city has flexibility in terms of when it makes decisions, because the city council is both the governing body and the legislative body. And so it's both the body that makes sort of the decisions that you make, but also the decisions that the school district votes on in terms of bonding and such. So we have the ability to take the time to work this through. You have the constraint of the annual meeting for a warrant article to even authorize the board to consider something like this. But we would fully expect that the process would take enough time to get your questions answered and to figure out if this really makes sense for both you and for the city. For the long term and for the community, how we can really build our community and see that we do work together.
Yeah. Paul, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, as you know, I volunteered for the rec for years and years and years. It's my understanding you use the facility for rec, for Lebanon Rec. What are you, other than being there, and what more do you gain from this?
Yeah, so great question.
We can't hear you.
Check, okay. Obviously, the gym is a big component to what we use, and our existing relationship with the school board and SAU staff allows our regular use of the gym and occasionally even the auditorium. So we have. I don't know that necessarily changes drastically, although it does some. If SAU is located on the third floor, perhaps even on the lower floor too, and rec is all in the middle, and and security protocols are in place so that SAU offices are secure from general public that would be using the, call it the community center floor in the middle. That would allow regular daytime use of the gym as well, which I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, Joanne and Tim, but I don't believe that that's a major component of gym use currently. Maybe there's some groups in there, but I think, you know, there's sound issues with people working on the second floor right now. And so it would make sense that gym use during the day, during the working day, is not available so much, but that would change, assuming we could isolate that sound enough that folks could work on the third floor without disruption. But there's plenty of groups that I think would certainly value and benefit from being able to access the gym during the working day, especially in the wintertime. So that would increase. Other major components that we designed in with the architectural plans that were done in 2014 included a teen room, so an after-school drop-in center for those who have sort of graduated from the CCB drop-in center. The CCB operates for 3rd through 6th graders, as I'm sure everybody knows with Mr. Vanier. But those 7th through, I'd say 10th graders, so before they get their driver's license, that's a missed opportunity that we've been facing as a community for forever. We haven't provided a place for these kids to go if they're not in programmed spaces. So teen drop-in center that focuses on that age group. Also converting a couple of the classrooms into either art spaces or after-school programming spaces, multi-function spaces, introducing a commercial kitchen in one of the areas that also leads into a conference or a community room of sorts that could either be rented or very versatile to use with programming space or user groups that want to rent and that kind of thing too. Our offices would clearly be located in there, but our footprint is very small as a recreation arts park staff. Some of that would probably change if we introduce other city staff that need to fit into the area too. So to Mayor McNamara's point, some of this has to be considered versatile and flexible, but all of that area can be programmed throughout the day and into the evening, that whole second floor.
I just want to introduce Councilors Doug Whittlesey and Jim Winnie, who are the Ward 1 councilors that are here this evening.
Thanks, Jim Winnie. One other thing that I think would be beneficial to rec being in that building is that there's, you know, some nice things happening at Westboro Yard finally. And if we can get control of that space, you know, the long-term plan is some riverfront access, which, you know, to me fits in nicely with some rec things, also potentially some playing fields and other green space. So, you know, sort of proximity to that may also be quite helpful.
So I have a question about the interim period where the school district is displaced. Is there any provisions in the city's discourse for budget or whatever that would provide assistance for that rental time or?
Not currently.
You'd utilize the 149,000 you spend right now and you'd use that as lease money. We didn't pay that much and we had 45 employees that we were renting space for.
I see. How many, so you had 45 employees. How many people are in the SAU building?
We have over 21.
Okay.
But
So we paid less than that. We paid less than $149,000 to lease space to be able to do that. And there's plenty of office space right now, unfortunately.
Right, but if we're making a transfer of value that's valued at $2.2 million, it seems like figuring out a way that makes that feel equitable. I think that's kind of the feeling that I'm perceiving, that might be something that people think about as, you know, in the negotiation for this.
Certainly. And obviously, from the day you moved out during the construction, we would be paying all of the operating costs of the building. So your operating costs would cease the day our construction started and not resume again until you moved in. So those funds will be available to you as well.
Got it. Do other people have questions? Because I actually have something that I'd like to say other people don't have more questions.
Why don't you just go ahead, Lisa?
Okay, well, so I am a resident of West Lebanon and I've lived there for almost 20 years. And I have actually had a couple of conversations with Paul Coates about what I perceived as the unequitable distribution of many things having to do with the park and recs and the school access and the busing access and everything having for how much we pay in taxes in West Lebanon. And Mount Lebanon is an outstanding school, and that is why we decided to stay in that area of town. We liked walking to the school. And in this last year, my husband and I decided that it was time for us to do something about our neighborhood because we had it. We paid so much money in taxes and we were feeling like we weren't being heard. So my president's on the school board and he's doing other things having to do with West Lebanon. But I just want to say that this building and the opportunity that it presents for the entire city, the meaningful distribution of access to recreation for children who live in West Lebanon is real. That's a real thing. Right now, the West Lebanon kids, they can get dropped off at CCBA, but if you're a working parent and you have no car, and there are plenty of them in West Lebanon, that's a very big challenge. And this Westboro Yard thing where there's going to be now fields, if we can look out for the next 5 years for our children, for our community, for our growing up community, especially in West Lebanon, there's very significant advantages to us at least considering it. And I would like to very wholeheartedly encourage us. There's nothing we have to lose by saying, let's find out, let's look at the drawings, let's consider doing this because it's something that West Lebanon deserves it. And so do the kids of West Lebanon. And a lot of the most disenfranchised children that live in Lebanon, the municipality, live in West Lebanon. And so that's something very important for us to consider as we're making a move to having a community center in West Lebanon. So that's all.
Other members of the board, Aaron.
I would think that we should at least consider this and we should think about this because we have a lot of things we want to fix around our schools. We have very little funding and we have a hard time getting it. So having an SAU office that we can't really justify putting money into, but the city can, I think we really need to consider this. At least go forward with the plans and see what the voters say.
Well,
Have we seen a warrant article that looks like what you are suggesting? The language that says the board has the ability to get into this agreement, but not authorizing the agreement itself. Have we seen that in the
Manager may
past?
have, I have limited familiarity because we don't do them.
We actually had the same law firm that represents the city and the school district, and that I had that question go to the superintendent because we wouldn't get involved in the actual wording of a warrant article for the school district. She can better answer that question.
So there'd be two different warrant articles. One would be proposing that the ownership be conveyed from the school district to the city. That has to pass. And the second one would be approval for a long-term lease of up to X amount, because the board, by handing it over, is also agreeing to pay the city hundreds of thousands of dollars that has to go in the budget every year as part of the lease. So both would have to pass. Another thing that the board could do is create a warrant article that asks the community to opine and take it under advisement as to how that vote comes out. So there's different ways that the board can use warrant articles to either seek feedback in general, or you have to have the 2 warrant articles pass to convey the ownership.
Right, but I think what we're talking about right now is not doing that, not doing those 2 warrant articles at this point, right? You're suggesting that we do a different kind of, either the opining warrant article or something else entirely that's different language.
Yeah, I'm suggesting warrant articles that give the board the authority under certain conditions that would go in the warrant article to enter into these agreements.
But then if we were going to enter into the agreements, then we'd have to get, at next time around, we'd have to get.
I don't know.
Not necessarily.
Okay, that's what I
I
don't.
mean, there is some, and this may not be a valid comparison, but, we used to have to go to the voters when we had a substantial amount of money in our capital reserve after selling those other school buildings. Every time we wanted to have to spend that money, we had to go to the voters. And we put out a warrant article in which the voters gave the board permission to withdraw money. So in other words, the voters delegated that authority to the board. And the last several years, we've been able to do that. In fact, this board itself has, I think within the last few months, or certainly within the last year, voted to withdraw money for a capital expense of that sort. And so I don't know if that's how comparable that is, but that is an example of something where the voters agreed to let the board make the decision to expend money. Now, if we'd have to get legal advice if that would translate into our ability to enter into agreements or sell real estate, but there is some precedent for transferring that sort of authority to the board.
I would just urge caution on that comparison, just to gently disagree. I mean, that might be true, but the trust fund laws are very specific. So the agents to expend, the ability to be an agent to expend is very specific to trust funds. And so that's how that's able to happen with trust funds. For example, you cannot put money into a trust fund as an agent. No way, shape, or form. The law is clear that only the voters can authorize putting money into a trust fund. You can take it out without being on the warrant if you're agent. So I don't know if you could do that, but I just, please don't keep that analogy in your head because trust funds are very specific things.
Well, we won't know until we ask, right? I mean, we can get some advice.
That's true.
So the timeline would be such that we could put a warrant article out there to get public opinion on the handover of the building. And then if, depending on how that, either way, however that vote goes, we would have a year. If you are correct about the warrant articles and we have to do them specifically the way you outlined, it would be a year to figure everything out before we decided to enter those 2 other warrant articles. Is that correct?
Well, I would say, I don't know if I represented a particular timeline, but I would say in regards to a lease without a non-appropriation clause requires the same sort of level of vote as a bond, which is 60% of the electorate. And so if that is not on the warrant in this March, then it's going to have to wait till the next March, at least for some sort of long-term lease, because that has to be approved by the voters. So it could almost necessarily be a 2-step process as far as that goes.
I think it'd be good to get legal clarification from your legal counsel on that. I mean, it's clearly one or the other, right? You either can be given that authority by the voters, or you have to go back to them a second time and specifically get the authority to enter into a lease. So I would, I don't think it would take your legal counsel too much time to opine on that. I wouldn't think. It would be good to have the answer.
The other part of that is we would expect there would be a non-appropriation clause. So if the school district chose to get out, it would have the option to do so. So we would expect, even with a long-term agreement, that you would have that built into it, a non-appropriation clause to give you that option.
I was just, if you are upfront aware that it might take a year to get the necessary approval, depending on what the lawyers say, is that still within your timeframe for the offer?
Very long time.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. I mean, we think that this is important enough to the city as a whole, that the extra year is something we can certainly deal with.
Okay.
Our preference is, we always like to get things done as quickly as possible for the benefit of everyone, and because we don't know what grant funds are going to be available next year. So
That's the other thing, is that there's an opportunity here that there may be large sums of federal money coming down, and we want to take advantage of those. That's one part. And the other part is to School Board Member Sorensen's statement. There's momentum building in West Lebanon. We want to keep that momentum going. It's all about revitalizing that community, and there's a number of steps, and we've got a number of those that are already underway, and we hope to get to fruition soon. People in West Lebanon have heard this forever. Oh, the
Yeah,
city's
yeah.
gonna do this, and
I live there.
nothing's happening. We want to do something.
I
We want to
know.
do something.
When is the Westboro Yard supposed to be?
the demolition is underway
Yeah.
now. It should be complete by Thanksgiving, or actually before Thanksgiving. And so our hope is that depending on how the state leaves it, and we do still have to execute our leases with them, but the governor went on record saying that was a done deal.
Yeah.
So we're anticipating that it is a done deal, and we would love to have those growing grass next year. Now, whether we can play on them next year, if the grass is adequate or not, is a little bit up in the air, but we want to see grass growing next year and potentially be able to play on them next fall.
What are the fields that are going to be there? I mean, are we
Yeah, I
multiple
mean,
fields? Do we even know?
We don't
what-
know yet. We're
Okay.
assuming multi-purpose fields. So we're thinking of a lot of things. And let me just quickly go into detail on that. So as you probably know, the Mascoma River Greenway has been extremely successful. Our ultimate goal is to expand the Mascoma River Greenway first into the skate park, and then from the skate park, probably down South Main Street, at least in the short term, into that rail yard. And then we're looking for the state to lease us land all along the river that would bring it up to Bridge Park. Bridge Park is the 2-acre parcel the city owns, right beside the bridge. It goes into the White River. And so we're looking at that as a continuous stretch. The Westboro Yard becomes a critical part of that because kids could bike to and from fields using the greenway. So we're seeing multipurpose fields. We're potentially seeing a West Lebanon farmers market, much like the Lebanon farmers market. We're seeing some historical interpretation. We're seeing all sorts of public outdoor uses. Now, I emphasize outdoor uses because that site does have subsurface contamination from the previous rail use. The state, while it continues to monitor, doesn't appear to be very interested in a substantial remediation of the site that would allow buildings, but it certainly does allow outdoor uses like playing fields and farmers markets and things like that. So we look at it as being a very, very, very active outdoor space, similar to Coburn Park.
Yeah.
I do want to keep things moving along. Let me, I know, Tim, you have something?
I just had a quick question.
Okay, let me get some more board questions and then we'll get back.
I have a-
Lil, will you have your hand up?
I have a question for Tim, I think. Does the losing of, going back to the asset question that Tammy raised earlier, does the losing of an asset like that affect our borrowing capability for bonds?
I don't think so. I say that quantifiably. They look at our financials. They actually, when the city bonds or when we bond, the other side has to provide information. So and because we participate in the bond municipal bond bank, we don't have our own bond rating. So I don't think so, but I would certainly
Okay, thank
double
you.
check.
Do you have
I'm just
something
curious,
else, Tim?
Paul, you outlined, how the gym would come into it, and you readily admitted that the gym is, it's a little smaller than Hanover Street, but it's better than nothing. I guess I'm sitting here wondering, why take over a 200-year-old building instead of just building new? Maybe in that 2-acre parcel you just talked about, like, wouldn't that be more ideal and probably cheaper?
Probably not. From a construction standpoint, renovation, and that's a good building, by the way. Renovation is likely going to be much cheaper than building a new structure. And we have the historic nature of it as well, which we think is equally important. Go ahead.
Yeah, and along with all of this, I mean, it's not been a secret that the rec department's been pursuing community center for, especially during 2020, we had an entire public input phase for a community center. And it's clear the demand for what we're looking to accomplish with this is there. The demand is for more than just this. You know, we've been talking about indoor turf field, walking track, that sort of thing. Has been a major component, especially since Grantham Indoor is closed. So we've all, I think, been feeling that crunch as a community once that really big asset, even though it wasn't in Lebanon, it has not been replaced over these many years. Clearly, that's not going to happen there within the SAU building footprint. However, the need for being able to program these gym spaces is definitely there. But a large part of that discussion was, where could we build something new? If we weren't going to be going into Sem Hill, that was not on the table at the time. Where can we do this sort of thing? And that's a major question. I mean, so even if we wanted to build a new facility from bricks and mortar, we have not identified where that could happen. And we had a hopeful place, and that has not worked out, and it's not on the table. So, like Mayor McNamara mentioned, you know, we've looked at Westboro, but to build on Westboro is really not an option because of the constraints that he mentioned. So we don't have places just to say, all right, let's go build a facility of this sort of size and nature.
And the 2-acre parcel that we own at Bridge Park is within the riverfront district. So it's within the floodplain. So we can't build there either.
Okay, so go ahead, Tammy.
I mean, I'm all for making a motion. I just have no idea what motion I can make because
Well,
I don't know.
let's talk a little bit about next steps.
Yeah.
I don't know if a motion is necessary, but
That's-
let's talk it through and see what reasonable next steps would be. It seems to me that we need to make a decision between fairly soon about any warrant articles that we would want to put on the ballot.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm not sure that we're in the position to be writing warrant articles tonight.
I mean, I would really defer to Joanne to ask legal counsel
Yeah.
can we get an advisory to get a general census from the community? And then does it have to wait the year before we put the other two more specific warrant articles? Or can we, as the city outlined, is there a different warrant that we can put on there that gives us the authority to approve this transaction?
Because I find it hard to make a decision about this without having done all of this work, right? Like it seems impossible to say there's enough space for all the things that we want to do that we can negotiate it out together. I'm sure we can, but we need to actually do that, right? We need to do the study, we need to do all of this. And so it seems like that's really the step that we're at now is this possible? It looks like there's 3 different versions of warrant articles that we're talking about right now. Which of those 3 is the one that we need for this next vote? And then we can move from there.
So I guess the question is there sufficient interest on the part of the board to take those next steps, to ask the superintendent to spend some money with the lawyer to do devote some resources to figuring out what the district's needs are, and to investigate just what our legal options are in terms of getting either, if we're required to go to the voters immediately for transfer of property and long-term lease, or if we can, as was outlined, ask for that to be delegated to the board, or some third option.
So what do we do? How do we make a motion to vote to yes, that we're interested?
I don't want to speak for the superintendent, but I know that it's often useful to have an unequivocal message from the board, what we want you to do.
Yes, but I think that's different than Lisa's question. I think I heard 2 different things. I heard superintendent go back, because we were supposed to be working through PNN on this, share that conversation with legal guidance. We use different legal guidance than the city. We don't want the same representation. So we'd be working with a different law firm than Drummond Woodsum, because we'd be separating out the 2. So for me, The question that you would want me to try to get to you by the next board meeting is, if there was interest, in what ways could we do it? Would it simply be the double warrant article that both has to pass with the majority that Tim talked about? Or would there be an advisory warrant article, and just the advisory is getting community input? If the community input is supportive of this concept, then I need to ask the attorney, if yes, then what? Do we need to wait till the following March, or is it giving us permission, and how to word that? I would bring that language back to the next board meeting if I can get the attorney to do it. And I would have the attorney present or virtually, because Tim and I can't answer the kinds of questions that you're asking with confidence. So that's what I would try to wrap up. There's a lot going on right now. And this is another big project coming our way, besides the equity audit, the renovation projects, and everything else that kind of came on to us this school year. But I would do my best to get the information back in a timely manner.
But I agree. I think that is the question, but it seems like it's not just one or the other. It seems like that the third question that we've been talking about, the third option, does that exist, right? Asking legal counsel, is there an option for a warrant article such that we are given the ability to consider this, right? The ability to make a decision after a certain time, preparatory to perhaps the other two warrant articles at another vote. So it seems like we need to look at what are all of the options that we could possibly do, and not go in and say, we want to know this or this. We want to know what are the possibilities that we have going forward.
Lisa?
But it seems like we need to be clear as a board how we feel about going forward at all, don't we? I mean, do we need to vote about that?
Well, I think if we have, if we vote to ask the superintendent to research these various options, I think that constitutes a de facto interest on the part of the board. I mean, if people don't want to pursue it, then don't ask Joanne to look into this.
Got it.
I think that's the way to do it. I'm a little leery about motions that simply express the sense of the board. I mean, I like there to be people can make motions, whatever motion they want, but it's good for it to be tied to an action. Yeah, MJ.
So I think I agree that the next step, logical step, seems that we really do need to go find legal counsel and get, answers to the warrant article questions, because this actually touches on two committees. It touches on PNN, and it also touches on finance and facilities, which has the boiler discussion under review and potential ESSER funds for that also has a term limit on it. So I think that if we are interested, then we can't really make any decisions and do our due diligence until we actually know what we're up against for a timeline with the attorney, because then that touches on the work that finance and facilities is doing right now.
How about a motion to ask the superintendent to take legal counsel to explore all possible, or many possible options for doing this property transfer? What are the options available to us, from, on the one hand, having to go to the voters in March and saying, we want to do this right away, to, on the other hand, doing some sort of public opinion poll or something in the middle?
Or if there's the possibility of the open-ended warrant article, like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
suggested.
Yeah. Do someone want to make a motion to that effect?
Do we have to repeat it? Can we-
Can't you say so moved?
I'll make a motion to request legal counsel to explore what warrant articles we would need to approve a transaction with the city of the Seminary Hill School. Is that enough?
What warrant articles? But
well, we don't
given
know
all
what
the
warrant
given the totality of the considerations that we've talked about today. I mean, you A, B, or C. I mean, I am all for at least a warrant article to get the public's opinion on it. as well. But beyond that, I don't know what a warrant article is
And
about.
this is something we'll have to hash out in more detail when we get some legal advice. I mean, I'm kind of skeptical about warrant articles simply saying, what's your opinion? And we went down that road last year, and remember, it just, get people all upset for something that's non-binding.
Yeah, true.
Presumably, though, it would be different because we'd be writing the warrant article this time around. And so
Yeah,
we
that's
would have
true.
language that would not be difficult to read.
Yes.
So I think we can assume that it's not going to be the same if we were saying, this is an opinion, this is a guidance for the board, whatever the language is, that's what the lawyer
Yeah,
says.
you're right.
But
It could be something which was legal. Yeah. Okay, do we understand what the motion is? Yes, Roger, you want to read something back to us?
Do you want the legal counsel to be separate of the city? Is that a distinct issue or not?
I'm just saying that when the city manager talked about Drummond Woodsum representing us, and we haven't been consulting with Drummond Woodsum because it's a potential conflict of interest. So I'm just being very clear that the attorney legal advice that I've been getting is specifically not Drummond Woodsum because of that fact. It just works best not to do that.
Okay. All right, so the motion then, let me see if I can capture it. The motion then is to instruct the superintendent to consult, to take legal counsel to explore warrant articles which can facilitate the transfer of the Sam Hill property from the school district to the city.
If the board should choose to do so, right?
If the board should choose to do so. Everybody okay with that?
I'd second that.
Yes.
Good, thank you. Is there any further discussion? Any further questions?
Well, I guess, is Joanne clear on what we want you to ask the attorney? Or do you want
Yes,
further
I have
clarification?
pieces of that I've shared in advance. So we
Yeah.
already know the two pieces have to go together.
Right.
It's more of this open option because attorneys don't like open option warrant articles that deal with money usually.
Right.
So
Right.
I'll have to get guidance on that.
Okay.
Okay.
And we'll still get updates from the city, if you have any. I mean, it'll be a continuous sort of.
we're not gonna have anything until we decide, right? Because we.
Well, I mean, they're gonna keep going with their
I was
plans.
just gonna suggest, and I don't want to interfere with your motion, but it seems like there's also a separate issue is if you're interested, I think the warrant article and how it's structured is one thing. Clearly, you can do a warrant article of some sort. You're allowed to do this. It's not a question of whether you can do it or not. It's how you have to go about with the warrant article. But the separate question is, are you sufficiently interested that you want us to, pursue some design work in the next month and try to get out ahead of this? Because we're willing to do that if you're interested.
Let's deal with the motion on the table first, and then circle back to that. Stephen.
I was just gonna answer that, if we're voting to instruct the superintendent to seek legal counsel on how to write the warrants, it's because people are voting in favor of that. It's because there is some level of interest in exploring the option.
Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Okay, 8-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys, very much. Next item on the agenda, we changed the agenda around, so we're going to do 8C next, Director of CIA update.
Little things in that. That's the EC one. Do you want me to use that in said, Joanne?
I'm sorry, I can hear you.
That's the EC one. I can use that one if that's the one that's coming up for you. If that's easier at this point.
That's the one that came up for me. People, so I went under shared and that's what came up.
Do you want to just see what's in the board packet? It's a PowerPoint, but we can make that, I can make that work too, if that's easier for you, or if that's coming up easier.
Well, what are the slides that were in the folder that we all have?
It's just, we put it in the agenda, it's in the packet as a PDF, and that's just harder to cycle through, but I mean, that's fine too. Whatever works.
Sorry.
So I apologize for the date being wrong on the PowerPoint. I can't read a calendar. I want it to be a day earlier. I don't know.
Since the board members have your presentation, you can go ahead and I'll try to find it.
Perfect. So this evening, I am here to provide an update across sort of 3 different areas. An update around state assessment from the spring of 2021, some information about summer programming that we ran, and some information about some of the summer curriculum work that we did. Last year, I spent a lot of time with the board speaking about local assessments. And this evening, I am speaking exclusively about state assessments. Those are the assessments that we're required under legislation to administer as part of federal accountability. Under federal law, we're required to administer math and ELA assessments every year between 3rd and 8th grade and once in high school. We're also required to administer science assessments at the elementary, middle, and high school level. In the state of New Hampshire, we administer our high school assessments in 11th grade, and we give our science assessments in 5th, 8th, and 11th grade. So while we educate or instruct 5th grade as part of a middle school model, that's our elementary science assessment. And so when I update you this evening, I'm going to speak to the 3rd through 8th New Hampshire SAS and ELA and math, the 5th, 8th, and 11th grade science, and then the 11th grade SAT. Those are the required state assessments that I'm going to provide you an update with tonight. As I go into that update, I thought there'd be a little bit of value in just taking a moment and going over the timeline of accountability in the state. Since 2005, the landscape has shifted a number of times. And even since 2018, given the pandemic, our implementation of assessments has caused a lot of asterisks next to the data that we have collected. Beginning in 2005, we joined as a state, we joined with Vermont and Rhode Island in what was the New England Common Assessment Program, the NECAP. We believed as a state that we would be better situated if we pooled our resources with 2 other states to develop assessments that met the expectations of No Child Left Behind. And we stayed as a part of NECAP until 2015. 2015 was the first year that states that adopted Common Core were required to administer assessments aligned to Common Core standards. And at that point in time, we left the NECAP in ELA and mathematics. We joined Smarter Balance, SBAC, but we kept the NECAP in science. And so up until through 2015, we gave a science assessment in 4th grade. All the other assessments are in the same grade levels we give them now. When federal legislation loosened, states were allowed to leave Smarter Balance and PARC, and we chose to then write new assessments. So beginning in 2018, under the umbrella of the New Hampshire SAS, we started giving the SAT as our high school statewide assessment in ELA and mathematics. And we contracted out with another company to write new 3 through 8 ELA and math assessments and new science assessments. And at that point in time, we started giving our science assessment in 5th grade. So we've now been under the New Hampshire SAS since 2018, but we're really only in our 3rd year of data because we don't have data from the spring of 2020. And so when we go into this and we think about the longitudinal data and what we can and cannot derive from what I share with you, I remind you of how the landscape has shifted. And I'll remind you of that again when we look at what's happened in the last few years. So the first slide that has actual data on it is from the spring of 2021. It's 3rd through 8th grade ELA data. The way the graph is structured The y-axis is percent proficient. The x-axis is the grade level. When we talk about proficiency in the state of New Hampshire, we are talking about students whose scores put them in level 3 or level 4 on the assessment. So a student, when they get a score, then get placed into one of 4 buckets. Level 4 is proficient, above proficient, proficient with distinction. Level 3 is proficient. Level 2 is not proficient. Level 1 is substantially below proficient. And so that y-axis represents the students in levels 3 and 4, proficient and proficient and above. On the chart, when you are looking at the maroon, that represents Lebanon. When you're looking at the gray, that represents the state at large. And what you'll notice across the 6 grade levels that we tested last year is that in 5 out of those 6 grade levels, students in SAU 88 performed at a more proficiently than their peers across the state. What you can't tell from that graph are 3 other factors that I think are really important, particularly around grade 7. So in every grade level, regardless of whether or not we beat the state, our students performed in the advanced proficient, the higher proficient, at a greater rate than their peers across the state, even in grade 7 where we didn't beat the state. In addition, in all of the grade levels we tested, we had fewer students in that level 1, substantially below proficient, than at the state in comparison with the state. And when we look at that grade 7 group that was 1 percentage point below the state average, 2 years ago, they were 7% below the state average. So overall, the data from ELA is quite good, given that we just went through a pandemic. The next chart is the exact same chart from a structural standpoint, but it's looking at math data. Similarly, in 5 out of 6 grade levels, students in SAU 88 had a higher proficiency rate than their peers across the state. In 5 of the 6 grade levels, students in SAU 88 performed in that level 4 at a higher rate than their peers across the state. And even in that 1 grade level that we did not beat the state in, we had fewer students that were in that level 1 or substantially below proficient. So again, overall, really positive data coming out of the end of the pandemic from last year. When we look at the SAT data, I just want to make sure it's clear that we are looking exclusively at the data that is collected on the SAT day administration of the SAT. So students take the SAT for lots of reasons. Some of our students may choose to take the SAT multiple times because they're looking to improve their score for college acceptance. The data I'm sharing is exclusively the data that goes with accountability. It's the data we collect on this one day in March when all of our juniors come in and take the test. So when you see this average nationally, that number is probably much lower than you would expect. So if you went off and Googled, average SAT score in 2021, the average nationally is going to be higher than the number I'm showing you because we're comparing it only with the administration at the SAT day level. So what you can't see from up there, but hopefully you can see in your packet or on your screen, is that in both mathematics and language arts or ELA, our student scores are higher than those of the peers across the state and nationally. In addition, as we saw earlier with our other assessments, our students had a higher proficiency level in level 4. So a greater number of our students are in the level 4, the above proficient, and we had fewer students that were in level 1 or substantially below proficient as compared to peers across the state. The next chart that I put in sort of dovetails with what I said earlier about understanding the fact that there's been a change in landscape in our assessments in the state. So this is historic SAT data back to 2016. In 2016 and 2017, whenever you got an update as a board to SAT data, you got general SAT data updates, meaning it was any student who took the SAT. That was maybe their second, maybe their third time taking the SAT. It was just our general Lebanon school data. In 2018, you see a pretty substantial dip in both our SAT data and the state SAT data. And that was the first year we administered to every student in the state. So when you think about this trajectory, you can't compare 2018 to 2016 or 2017, because all of a sudden we completely changed the pool of students and the number of opportunities they've had to take the test in the data collection. So then we have 2019, which is a fairly traditional administration. So you have 2 years of data. Then we hit 2020. We did not give the SAT in the spring of 2020 because we were closed. So that data point now represents the fall of 2020. It represents seniors, and it represents us being an AB hybrid and not our same pool of number of students coming in to take the assessment. So that gets a little asterisk. Then we get to last year's data, which is again in the spring now. So it's a traditional implementation time. We had the largest opt-out of our assessments that we've ever had because we had families that were not either comfortable coming into the building or for other factors. And so now this one also gets a second little asterisk because it's the first time we administered the ELA portion on the computer and not handwritten. That doesn't mean the data is better or worse. It just means that all of a sudden that data point was collected in a very different way. So over the past 16 years, our data collection process has had lots of ups and downs because of a change in landscape over and over again. So I just share that to give you a little bit of context in how we can and cannot use some of this longitudinal data. The final assessment I'm sharing with you is the science assessment. This is probably the most challenging one for me to speak to because we are assessing students in multiple grade levels of content in 1 year. So when we look at that 5th grade assessment, the students taking that test are being tested on content from 3rd, from 4th, and from 5th grade. When you get to the 8th grade test, it's 3 years of content. When you get to 11th grade, some of those students are not even in science classes and they're taking a state assessment around science. So we share this data as an update from accountability standpoint. It's a really, really challenging assessment for us to use as an organization to improve our processes. We did beat the state in terms of our percent proficient in all grade levels. We had more students scoring at the upper, above advanced or advanced proficient in level 4 and fewer students at level 1. But other than that, there's not a lot that we pull out of this assessment in all transparency. I have questions at the end, but I'm wondering if it's helpful just to pause before I go into summer programming. Are there any sort of assessment specific questions? Yeah.
So the challenges you described with the science grade, the science assessment, all schools have those same challenges, right? So the comparison to how peers are elsewhere in the state is still a valid assessment.
It's valid in terms of an accountability and how our students are in comparison to their peers. It's not a useful tool. When we collect data, we want to use that data. It is just a challenging assessment for us as an organization to take and then use to implement change or to understand either why or why not a student might not do well. But in terms of a corollary to how they do to their peers, it's as valid as any assessment measure could be.
The challenges are consistent across.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Lisa, on the SAT data, when you were going through it, it sounded like you were using the same vocabulary you used to describe the SAS data. You're talking about levels 1 through 4. How is that data generated? I mean, is this something you do or does how?
So normally the SAT was developed with a clear purpose, right? It was developed so that colleges had one measure they could use it for all learners that were applying to college. When the state selected that to become its state assessment, it had to develop criteria for accountability because it was making it an accountability determinator. So the state layers on a level 1, 2, 3, or 4 designation based on cut scores that they set. So that's done at the state level. It doesn't go to college. It's purely an accountability measure so that we can look at percent proficient.
Mm-hmm. And what we're looking at here are students in the top 2 tiers. These are the same percentages. I can't really make it out. I'm sorry.
Which slide are you looking at?
I'm still on grade 11 SAT
Okay.
data.
So you're looking, that is math and ELA. So the
Right.
column that is on your left are the math scores. So that is the actual score on math.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't compare percent proficient nationally because they don't do percent
Yeah.
proficient on a national level.
Right. That's what puzzled me because I
Yep.
know they don't do that.
No, it's something our state does in order to determine how we're doing from an accountability standpoint.
Let me ask you something else, and this is, I guess, maybe a sort of a subjective question on your part. When I look at the ELA SAS scores and the math SAS scores, and I see this, it's comforting that the maroon bar is higher than the gray bar. But then I look at the y-axis and I see that only 50, in the case of ELA assessment, only 50 to 60% of our kids, depending on the grade level, are proficient or better. So put another way, we're talking about 40 or 50% are not proficient, and it gets a little worse with math. So regardless of how we shape up against other schools in the state, is this something we're satisfied with? Is this something that we always have to live with a certain substantial portion of our kids being less than proficient? What's your take on that? And I guess the related question is, what do we, if it's not acceptable, what long term, what can we do about it?
Let me begin by saying that one of the reasons we share the state data is because without it, there's no way to say what that score means. Every single test, every single year, every single cohort is different. The state assessments are written in a way where you can't look from one grade level to one grade level. You oftentimes see large dips that happen for us and at the state, which typically indicates that that particular test in that particular year might have been disproportionately challenging as opposed to previous years. So part of the reason we show the corollary to the state is not to communicate that we are necessarily doing better per se, but it gives us a perspective on what the data means. Because if we just look at our scores in isolation, it's really hard to know what in that year 60% proficiency means. With that said, when accountability came out, there was a lot of concern on districts about this idea of trying to hit 100% proficiency and how would we ever get there? The greater your score, the harder it continues to be to increase that score. So as we get closer and the more students we get into proficiency, the students that we haven't gotten there are often the hardest to then get up to proficiency. So in some ways, what's comforting when I share the data from our district is the fact that we have more students in that level 2 than in that level 1. So more of our students, even that are not fully proficient, are sitting in that spot just below proficient, as opposed to sitting in that bottom spot of being substantially below proficient. And so it really does matter when you think about not proficient. The more students we have that are sitting in level 2, that's a really different place to be. And we have the capacity to move students sitting in level 2 much more easily than if I were to say to you that when we look at that group that's not proficient, that they're all in that level 1, they're all substantially below proficient. I'm not sure I will ever sit before a school board and say that I'm satisfied with the data. I think our work is always to improve outcomes for learners, whether that's SAS data or NEWA data. I'm giving you an update about accountability data. It's one measure. I think it's not the only measure, and I think it's really important that we look at other measures in terms of how we're doing for our students.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's an answer for you.
No, that's fine. I think that's a good answer. I think at some point, if you have this data, it would be interesting some future report to look at how effective we are at moving kids from level 1 to level 2, from level 2 to level 3. That would be very interesting.
So we have, if a child has taken an assessment with us, at least in math and ELA, not for science, we can't do growth data. We can do growth data. And that's actually one of the most interesting things to look at is what are our students that are high growth or high score, but low growth? And how are we doing for the students that have had low scores, but high growth? So we can absolutely present something like that for you.
I also think that the board has supported the curriculum work in purchasing ARC, the reading program. So when I heard your question, I thought about action steps.
Yeah.
Because we always want to continue to push and to really have our students succeed to the best of their ability. And part of our work next year heading into it is a revamp and a relook at our entire Envisions math program. So it's now been here 8 years. It doesn't always match the Common Core standards and certain things that we would like to see a program match. And part of the 20% of the ESSER funding, I'll be coming forward to board to talk about potentially purchasing a new math curriculum that teachers have vented that we think is a better fit for our students to continue to promote their learning in math. Another thing is just a year or so ago, Lisa came and presented the math curriculum, which is now at least aligned and written. And this year, there's an expectation of teachers to begin to use that math curriculum. And next year, have it fully embedded. So there's work we're doing around those two areas. I just appreciate the board's support. When you say yes, we're actually doing it and of value. And then the last thing I'll say is that we have a whole bunch of teachers and administrators that are part of DataWise out of Hartford. And that whole concept is, how do you use the data in a meaningful way, day to day, not just a chunk like this? And so we are doing work in that area as well.
The piggyback to that I would add is when you look at our data, fifth grade comes up for math. I think every year I've come before the board, we've talked about fifth grade math. And that grade level of teachers has actually started doing an analysis of all the years of SAS data to really try to understand, what is happening in that particular grade level, because it's almost always grade 5. So our teachers take the data very seriously and are really, are committed to a continuous improvement model.
Thanks. Anyone else have any questions, or should we let Lisa proceed?
So after we finished all of that assessment in the spring, we ran summer programming. We offered 3 distinct programs this past summer. We offered a rising preschool through rising 9th grade program. We offered a high school specific program, and we offered Title I intervention services, either in the 3 weeks leading up to summer programming or the 3 weeks at the conclusion of summer programming. We employed 64 staff members across a variety of roles, as you can see. We had general educators, special educators, behavior support, EMTs, paraeducators. We supported 152 students. I can't really see that far away, but I think it was 7 preschoolers, 77 students in pre-K through 5. There were 33 high school students who earned more than 30 credits. They completed 24 courses. 7 of those students became eligible for co-curriculars this fall, and 1 student even graduated. And then about 43 of the students that we supported this summer had an extended school year written into their IEP. Overall, the length of the preschool through grade 9 program is 3 weeks, and the high schools is a little bit longer. They start in June. But it was a pretty dynamic summer, being able to be in person as opposed to last summer. We also did more curriculum work. Our curriculum work is never done, and our educators committed more than 410 hours of curriculum work this summer. 64 teachers in all 4 of our schools. We had representation from special education, library media specialists, our support for English language learners, classroom teachers. We did work in science, world language, English, social studies, and math. Science and world language had started pre-pandemic, but the last time they were able to meet was in the summer of 2020. So this was an opportunity to bring those teachers back together and sort of reinvigorate that work now that we're all able to meet more. We launched English language arts and social studies. Those committees met for the first time this summer. And then we did a day of professional learning around the math that Dr. Roberts was referencing, giving teachers time to plan as grade level teams in order to better implement the new math curriculum. That work is ongoing. We have met with ELA, science, social studies, and world language teachers once since school has started as well.
Lisa, I know in EC, I think it was last spring, we talked a little bit about learning loss during the pandemic. I think you talked about sort of work being done in individual classrooms or across grade levels. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how it looks now, in the fall, month and a half after school started?
Sure. So some of the processes that we put in place last year, we are continuing. So we are starting all of our students at the elementary and middle school level. We will start our NEWA testing. So a piece of it is really trying to understand where all of our learners are at the K-6 level. We are leveling all of our students in reading. We've done some work at some of our school levels to push in reading specialists into classrooms where we've seen more learning loss. At 5th grade, we have a reading specialist that is actually pushing into all the 5th grade classrooms. We're doing some push in at Mount Leb. So some of those are at the building level. And then our classroom teachers are, as whenever they can, meeting in small groups, grade level teams to do more planning based on the data. The middle school is running data teams for all their teams are running data meetings this year, once a month, selecting data that they want to focus on based on what they've seen. So it's an ongoing process in all of our schools. There's grade level PLCs that are happening, and they're doing data work and really trying to unpack where groups are at. I think that we're still really excited overall, though, from what we've seen. I mean, that doesn't mean that we don't have work to do, but academically, we are overall, it's been a good start to the year.
Thank you.
Thank
Doesn't
you.
look like there are any other questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa.
Have a great rest of your night.
I will now go back to item 8A on the agenda, the superintendent update.
Trying to chunk the superintendent update in various sections this year regarding health and safety. I've been in consistent communication with Ginkgo Bioworks Concentric. They have said to me that they have staffing, so we have moved forward with that this year. I did drive to Concord because that's the only way you can pick up specific tests that were paid by the federal government. So we have those and delivered them to the schools. Attended the virtual DPHS update meeting, communicated positive COVID cases to the community. And I participated in the 2-hour suicide awareness and prevention webinar that I had worked on with Dartmouth Hitchcock. As far as ESSER 3, DOE has added another layer of expectations that each request must have a plan that provides an overview of the request and multiple pages on how the request follows federal and state expectations over the next 3 years. I completed the application form and submitted it to the DOE. We've been in communication with Paul Marinese and Margaret Thomas regarding ESSER projects. They participated in the F&F meeting that included the projects and an overview. And then as a follow-up, I scheduled walkthroughs that I'm going to do with Hanover Street and Mount Leb with Paul and Katie and Jack and Dana. Based on the questions from finance and facilities, I thought it was best that we actually go into buildings and walk through them together. I'm making sure that we're literally on the same page with the design concept, and then worked on ESSER document for the board with Tim Ball. Superintendent Social Agency Summit, continue to work with Alice Eli on that for October 21st with a focus on mental health. Vital Communications, the full education day is next week, October 20th. It'll be held at Seminary Hill, and then we go over to HACTC, and then we come back to Seminary Hill in the auditorium that day. Policy Committee met. We got through quite a few policies. F&F, we met. PNN, we met right before this meeting as well. There's also an ongoing conversation with LEA and LSS. That was a multi-hour discussion that Tim and I participated in. Been in communication with Sean, who was here this evening to plan the agenda for the Joint Task Force Committee. And there were some communications with board members in general for everybody. And then individual board members had some questions or things that they were sharing with me. So I was able to visit several schools, and as Miles mentioned, I met with the student council. We talked about putting up the plaques in each school and meeting with Dale. Facilitated the SALT meeting, so our conversations continue about meal delivery in schools. It's still, it's difficult with training. Pairs aren't allowed to be involved with the meals, of picking up the bag meals and all of that. So we're trying to figure out how to do that best. I think our drop off, our pickup times are going better at Hanover Street School. We talked about technology and the schedule for state assessments, which Lisa mentioned and did a presentation on this evening. The SAU office, to update our calendars and talking about emergency response drills. There are some personnel matters in different buildings that I met with SAU administrators and school administrators about. We worked with the city rec department on the use of both Seminary Hill and the other schools to support some of the rec programs. I've been in communication with Mr. Morano regarding the equity audit. And the last letters I've sent to the staff, I've given him his contact information to reach out to him individually. And at the last superintendent's letter, I also sent out to parents his contact information if people are interested beyond the surveys, he'd be happy to talk to individuals. Monthly meetings have started with school principals, so I've met with 3 so far this week. Tim and I reviewed the account payable specialist applications. We'll be holding interviews for that soon. Coordination and meetings with legal counsels and LMS to seek guidance regarding a student incident. Tim and Dana and I met regarding the track. We also helped to coordinate the track funding committee that met here. Participated in the DOE commissioners meeting where he really focused on schools not going remote unless there is a weather or other kind of emergency. So that was a big focus of his conversation, and the status of ESSER funds. Communication with Grantham superintendent regarding the coordination of upcoming student meeting, and the DOE ARP ESSER 3 maintenance of equity part 2 Zoom session. They just continue on, and we try to keep on top of all of it as best as we can. I had a board question in regard to at-home testing. So DPHS said that we school districts should accept at-home COVID testing, and this is not an area that I have a lot of information on. So the nurses were kind enough to take the time to write that this little one pager that talks about the nurses recommending PCR tests as they're still the most accurate. The at-home COVID testing is only to be used for testing symptomatic individuals. And they have listed these tests or kits, which are FDA approved. They would prefer those, but we understand that kits are hard enough to get if you can even find them. So they mentioned that testing sites are overburdened. We're finding that some of our parents getting appointments, I believe it was at APD, was challenging. And so we're working with them to figure out how we can get our families in easier for testing. And at the bottom, they talk about how they understand that COVID tests are hard to find. However, by being proactive and putting together a procedure now, it will help provide families with the information to move forward once the tests are easier to purchase. I also was in communication with Dr. Chan in regard to barriers. In our district, plexiglass barriers are up mostly due to a visual reminder to physically distance. So we're very aware of the research of the plexiglass barriers. He wrote me today that there's no health concern if students are sitting in their classrooms with the small ones that you might have seen on students' desks. That's not interruptive of the airflow in the room. Or if there's a staff member like the front desk, that they feel that the plastic barrier is more so of a reminder to give them space so people aren't leaning right over them. They're not wall to ceiling type things. So what I have asked principals, and it's on our note for SALT tomorrow, is to identify classrooms where teachers prefer not to have any plexiglass, and we don't have to have the plexiglass. And then look at areas where the plexiglass is not a safety hazard, but is more so a visual reminder. We're still in a pandemic, folks. We gotta, keep your space. A good example of that is the library here. The paraeducator emailed me, and it's a big open space. Sometimes kids like to congregate together, and by having some of these plexiglass separations, it's just keeping kids not being right close to each other in those kinds of environments. So I had a question about plexiglass. I researched it, looked into it. And because other people might have questions why you might see plexiglass in our buildings, I wanted to say it at the board meeting. Principals will write a note to families saying how we're using plexiglass, and we're understanding that the concept of blocking the virus is not accurate. It doesn't really do anything for that. And that's why in the original 5-day back to school plan, we had talked about removing some of the plexiglass barriers. So that is all I know about plexiglass at this point. As I say, there's always something new to learn, and I'm happy to look into things and get the best guidance I can for our district. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
When is Marinese coming back to present to the Marinese?
Next week,
Okay.
next board meeting.
And that's in follow-up to our previous discussion
It
with them and
is,
asking for the more.
Yeah,
Okay.
finance and facilities, Aaron can give an update about what they discussed, but Marinese is the 27th. And so I'll also have to try to book our attorney for the 27th as well. I'm writing it down so I don't forget. Thank you.
So
MJ?
I'll continue with my favorite questions of COVID testing that I seem to have every week. How did the first round of testing go? I know we kind of had we did with was it bioconcentric, whatever they're
Yeah,
called.
concentric.
We had like kind of a start and then a stop and then a start again. So how did the first round go with the student? Like I've heard some anecdotal stories of some students who were upset that their parents had signed them up for, didn't want to be at the test. I'm just kind of wondering how.
I haven't heard a lot about that. When I was meeting with the principal, he mentioned that there was one student who just didn't want to get tested. And so the principal called the parent and the parent said, don't do it. It's not worth it. I think it's always difficult because they are using nursing staff from different places. So coordinating and making sure people get here at the time we need them. And I talked with Ben Rome, who was here a while ago. He conference called into one of our meetings from Concentric just to review our schedule. So he was very clear. We had some nurses come to Hanover Street this morning. And that's because they pre-scheduled the nurses so that the second day they come back in case there's a positive case. So we were just like, why are they here? And then he explained that he's going to send them. And then we would say, there's no positive cases because they don't have access to the data that we have. So we're beginning to understand how it all fits together. My hope is that they continue to give us the staffing. And it's just another mitigating layer that we can put in place. So yeah, trying anything new, it's difficult trying to schedule students in like middle school. So we were going to have high school during advisory, and we decided to have the nursing staff be in the cafeteria or gym for a specific time. And then kids would just go when they could. So we're trying to make it flexible for each school and developmentally appropriate. I met with Katie today and she said the Mount Leb one went so smoothly this week. So that was good. And then the third part of that is courier service, which is separate, making sure that they get to us, picking up the package and things like that has taken a bit of work.
And so how do you get the data? So they don't have the data. You like log into a portal to get the
Yes.
data after everybody does it?
Yes, we have access to it.
And was
Each
that
school-
process smooth for you?
The
or-
only people who have access to it is the principal, the nurse, and myself for each building. And I only did it to set it up to manage it, but they go in and check and they can tell if there's a positive or not within that pool.
And did that process work smoothly for them the first time
Yes, they
around,
were
or-
very excited that there were negatives. So they were hopping on, like waiting to see, because it's not a confirmed positive. I think I'm saying that correctly.
right.
So we have, that conversation about how we're sharing that information if it's unconfirmed with parents, with students. We want to decrease stress. That's why we're doing this. And then the second test 2 days later. And then if there's a positive test, we're pushing that information. And if there's a unconfirmed positive case, that pool of parents are notified that it's unconfirmed. And then they would be notified if it's negative or positive in the next round.
And so have you had more parents sign up for it since the first round happened? Or?
I haven't monitored it. I haven't had a moment to hop in to see. It'd be a great thing, to talk about at SALT to see if more people have an interest in it. But the ones who aren't doing it, I don't know if the positive cases we've recently had would be like, hey, maybe it's just worthwhile to have your child tested. It's also difficult, as I mentioned, to get your child tested. And if we can do it in school, it's easier for some parents. That might be an added benefit to them to want to sign up. And parents can sign up at any time, and they can also withdraw their child at any time.
And then with regards to the at-home test, is that actually up and running now? Because I noticed that it wasn't in the newsletters this week. So it almost seemed like it was kind of tabled. Or
What?
that the at-home testing accepting, is that actually going on now? Is it something that a school nurse would accept if you
Yes.
took a picture? Because 1 week there was all these protocols about how to do it, but they didn't tell you what the tests were. And now it seems to have disappeared from all of the
Oh, I don't know.
newsletters.
My understanding is that as a district, we're accepting at-home tests. And we've been informed by DPHS that's probably the best thing to do if parents have access to them. And if a parent either calls or, we just have to rely on our parents to be the ones to tell us if it's positive or not. And our parents have been great to work with. I'm so appreciative of keeping kids home if they have symptoms, getting them tested. I know that's a hard thing for families to do, but I think our community's really done a good job with that.
Anything else for Joanne? Yeah, go ahead, Lou.
I'm really grateful to the nurses for writing this up. Actually, it's helpful. I just want to clarify that even though the nurses recommend PCR tests, DHHS, and so therefore us as well, will accept antigen tests. Is that, that's what we're saying.
I believe so. I'm looking at MJ because my PCR antigen knowledge is low. Whatever they call a home test.
Right. Yes, that's correct. But I think the one confusing thing is now how they will accept it, because there was this one kind of snippet of protocols in a newsletter and then it just kind of vanished. So it was something about taking a photo and you had to do it because it's like a 15-minute window that it works on. And so it'd be nice to kind of have some elaboration on that,
Right.
especially in the newsletters. And then one other thing I noticed while we're on the newsletters, when we switched from Gino to Katie, we don't get those newsletters anymore in our
I've
emails,
certainly
so-
been writing them.
Yeah, so we don't, they
Oh,
get
board
posted
members
on like
don't.
this.
Board members aren't getting them anymore.
Oh, okay. She probably just needs to add that into her system.
Right.
But yeah, I agree with MJ. Like, I think we need to say in recommendation 1, the nurses always recommend, but they will accept whatever version of at-home test you have, whatever using these, whatever qualifications are, procedures that we want.
Well, I
Because
think it did say the test had to be FDA approved, and I think that these are the only 3 that are actually FDA approved.
Right, that's not clear. So I think we just need to clarify, because DHHS is saying at-home
We are
tests.
recommending they get FDA tests, but we know that they're limited and there's no authority from us to really tell a parent which tests. So we recommend, because those, I guess the nurses feel have more validity to them, but we're not going to say, bring your child to school, they tested positive, but that's not an FDA approved test. We're
Right, so
gonna-
that all just needs to be spelled out. I think that's because, again, whatever procedure we're gonna have in accepting them, it just needs to be clear what will count, how you have to present it, who you're sending it to, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's best sent in the principals, individual ones,
Right,
but
which
have the
it
same
was,
language in all 4.
right, and it was 1 week and then it just vaporized, and I was like, oh, are you not taking the tests anymore? You have to get in line, because you're right, I mean, I personally had to wait 5 hours online for the COVID hotline to get a test, it was Labor Day weekend and they haven't ramped up because the DHMC has been more concentrating on vaccinations at this point and has used their staff in that way. So in APD, I didn't get a call back for 2 days from them. So I agree that if you can find these tests, it could be a game changer if you know how to use them correctly.
Thank you. I'll follow up with the nurses on that. And the principals at SALT tomorrow.
Any other questions from the principals, from the superintendent's report? Okay, let's move on to Tim. Budget, chapter 2.
Yeah, so just a few more updates on some reports on how things looked last year. And this will all be put in your binders when you put them out. So this one is about some area information, review of the CBAs that affect the budget, capital reserve funds, and knowns and unknowns, but sometimes is a long list and sometimes not. So tuition information, it's in your packet, so hopefully you have it in front of you. This is just a number of students that we get. This is area related only. So you can see the numbers there for middle school and high school for Grantham, and just the high school for Plainfield. There was last year a Plainfield child at LMS that was billed at the non-area rate because they don't participate in the area at the middle school. Tuition information, that's just a list of what we charge for tuition under the area agreement through 2021. I'm working on a 22-23 rates now. Obviously, that's due to the other districts so they can do their budgeting. And then I like to show how much money we take in from Grantham and Plainfield. If you look at 2021 school year last year, $4.2 million. That's roughly $2 on your tax rate or $600 on a $300,000 house. The point there is that that's good revenue. This revenue you don't need to raise in local taxes. So it's very beneficial to Lebanon. The next slide is just a list of, we take kids in from other districts too. Croydon, Heartland, Cornish, Piermont, Enfield, and South Stratford last year. There's a different non-area rate. It's a little higher that they pay, but you can see that, at least in my opinion, I think Lebanon is a school that is desired in the area because that's a lot of different schools.
Tim, what is the non-area rate? Just remind us.
Oh, I don't have it in front of me. It's,
Oh, that's
it's like
okay.
$1,000 higher than the area rate. It calculates it out as part of the area formula, so I'll share that with you when I get it done. I apologize. It's not like double. It's maybe a couple $1,000s more tops. CBA highlights. So that's any questions about the area agreement before we move on? So, as you know, that was on the warrant, so that's all set for another 10 years, which is a burden off everybody's shoulders. It's good. So in the so now CBA, the point of this is what are you going to see in your budget that's proposed? LSS, that's paras and custodians. And if we have an LPN, but basically paras and custodians. They're in the third year of their contract, 1.75% to the grid. The teacher wages in this budget will be the same as this year because that's a separate warrant article. So if you'll see lines where there's, one or two people in a line and the number from last year to this year is exactly the same. It's just because the raise is a separate question. Secretaries, they're in the final year of their contract at 75 cents an hour increase. When we did the warrant, when this was passed, it was 14,583. That's what calculated increase means. That means that's what the number was on the warrant. There's been some personnel changes and it might be slightly different, but you get the idea to the budget. In the lag, last year, their contract at 2.5% increase, and that number was 26,016. Again, there's been some changes. Yes, ma'am.
LAG stands for?
I'm sorry, Lebanon Administrators Group. That's the principals. LSA is the Lebanon Secretaries Association. Apologize. Good question. Unfortunately, you'll notice, or maybe it's not clear from the LSS comment, but next year, all three of these are expired. So that's, there'll be a lot of negotiations next year.
Make sure you spell that right in the minutes.
Sorry. Here's just a little history. Next slide, just a little history of the two major unions as far as staff wise goes, things that have happened over the years. I'm not going to read all those to you, but we changed some healthcare and we, 1 year for LEA, we added 2 steps in 1 year and created a new step. But you can see, I just wanted to show you some background through 21-22. That was $3.5 million increased over those years from 15 to 22. And for LSS, from 17 to 23, it's $931,000.
I found the tuition rates. So for non-area K through 6, it's 22,509. For non-area 7 and 8, it's 17,792, so 792. And non-area 9 through 12 is 17,459.
Thank you.
School care rate increases. So there's basically 3 players in the healthcare world for schools in New Hampshire, 2 major ones, and then there's a third one that's called the New Hampshire Interlocal Trust, which is maybe we'll consider it in the future. But the 2 main players are school care And Health Trust, which is, so school care is Cigna, they use Cigna, and Health Trust uses Blue Cross Blue Shield. Our two big unions, the teachers and the paras, both use school care. So that's, 95% of our costs. The only people there's only maybe 30 people or less on the Health Trust plan. Basically, the Secretary's Union and a few scattered SAU employees. So so that's why we talk a lot about school care. And there's the rates since 15-16. The total healthcare expenditure increase from 16 to 21 was 1,088,000. And we use 2 commas in my world, so I apologize for the second comma. I'm budgeting right now, as I'm doing the numbers right now, 5%. The way school care works is they give you an actual rate increase, but a little later. So there's 2 different ways you can do it. Health Trust gives you they call it a guaranteed maximum rate. They already called and gave me that, and the rate will never exceed whatever they tell you. And you budget that, and you don't get the real rate until deep in the spring after the budget's passed, and you save some money that way. School care does it differently. They wait a little while longer before they give you the rate, but they give you the actual rate, and I'll get that in early December. So you're going to see in your budget book a 5% increase, but I'll be able to adjust that down before it actually goes on the warrant. Well, hopefully down. I mean, they don't give you any guidance ahead of time. So 5 seems to be reasonable based on, I think it's a little safe based on those percentages there. But if they happen to come and say it's going to be 8%, then we'll have to change the number up. But hopefully 5 is a safe number. Any questions about insurance or people before we move on?
So how many people are in that school care pool? Like besides the district, like total statewide, is it a large pool? So that's why the increases are flatter or?
Well, we're our own experience group. Every district has their own experience pool. So our rates are driven only by our experience. As far as how many districts have school care, I actually don't know. It's pretty big. So school care is like a union of the national NEA and administrators, I guess. It's like a 50-50. The board is like half teachers and half administrators. So it's this idea that they sort of partner together. And so it's a little different than just a regular health trust. But
so then I guess if you're all on experience rated on your own district, about how many lives do you have that you're experience rated on? Do you know?
Well, roughly 350. It's not huge.
That's lives or just employees? Because like lives would be employee in a family or.
Oh, good question. Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry, he's been under. That's why I'm asking.
You got 350,
roughly,
350 subscribers.
Roughly, yeah, out of 300. And, like I said, we only have about 20 or 30 people in Health Trust. So I can get exact numbers of employees. Dependents will be harder to find out. I could do it, but it's going to take me some time if you want to know total pool size.
It goes into your experience rating, which helps flatten out your rates. That's why I'm just kind of curious, but.
And the only downside is that by New Hampshire law, retirees are in our pool. So if you retire from our district, you get to stay in our pool until you join Medicare. So that, as you might imagine, that typically hurts the rating a little bit because they're, a little older just generally. So, but that's not a huge number either. Sounds like you know more about how experience ratings are set than me. Capital reserve funds, these are balances as of June 30th. And then I showed like building fund number 1, which is really our only building fund now. We're adding 500. So the new total will be 2.4 million. Our special ed reserve fund was 1.2. We're adding 3. It'll be 1.5 million when I'm done with that. And then we have 2 other funds that have been there. We haven't accessed or done anything with them. The emergency management fund of 53,000 and the tech fund of 216.
And the track will come out of building fund 1?
Correct. Whatever we need to pay for the track would come out of that. Usually those first 2 we write warrant articles for. The board may decide not to write a warrant article for the special ed reserve fund. It's up to you guys. It's 1.5 right now. It's pretty healthy. Last slide, the dates are wrong. I apologize. Hopefully you all know your board rep dates. It's October 26, 27, and 28. If you forgot your time or whatever, I have the schedule up. But all of you have worked hard with me to get a time schedule in those weeks. Or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
I have a question. Before those dates, do we see the binder or do we just see the binder at the date?
Yeah, no, you don't know. Unfortunately, you won't have much information before that date. It'll be just your school. And you'll go as much detail as you want. We're prepared to go line by line if you want. Then after everything's done, then I start compiling the binders and it takes me most of the 2 weeks. So you'll have the binder on the first board meeting in November and you have a chance to look at it between then and Thanksgiving, or the Saturday before Thanksgiving.
So if we need to take longer than the hour that we're allotted, say, for SAU.
Why would you want to do that?
Can we take longer than that hour? That's the question that I have.
Some of our meetings are back to back for the budget conversation.
So we could reschedule, schedule another one a different time.
You can, I mean, honestly, we've vetted every single line with the principals, and board members tend to focus on sweeps, like why is this up 5,000? Why is that down 5,000? Not why are you up or down hundreds when we have the conversation. So I think, from board reps that have been there, I'd say a half hour to 45 minutes and we're good to go. The elementary school budgets are smaller, and we were at the middle school, which is pretty big budget last time, and that was like half hour, 45 minutes.
Well, for the SAU, it's actually SAU / I started calling it SAU district wide because it's not just, in the past, some board members have thought, see this $8 million budget, how's that for the SAU? Just remember, as you know, a little bit, just remember, I'll say it out loud, that the SAU is anybody who doesn't fit into a school. So it's all the transportation. It's a lot of the facility stuff, although most of the facility stuff you'll see building by building, but just remember that the district wide, there's a bunch of staff, PTOT stuff that are district-wide employees, even though they don't work in our building.
The SAU budget is probably the only one that's not 80% personnel. Right, because you have all those other expenses in there.
Right.
Any other questions for Tim? MJ?
We get the buses? Were they supposed to be delivered in October? Where they do buses
So
here?
we bought 5 buses. This is the good thing about owning our own fleet outright, is that we're changing the fleet up a little bit. And so instead of 5 big buses, we're getting 2 smaller buses and 3 big buses. The smaller buses are due, I think, next week. The big buses, because of production delays, it'll be middle of November, which is frustrating because we need them. I mean, we didn't get rid of any buses yet, but the ones we're replacing they're not doing so well. So it has been delayed about 6 weeks. And it's just a matter of being able to procure the appropriate stuff to build them. So
we missed any runs?
No, we're keeping them running, but it's just like, put that in the notes too. Sorry.
We've had difficulty with athletics. That's been an issue with our buses. Either the buses have not been able to run, or we don't necessarily have enough bus drivers to get to all of the athletic programs. So we've had to make some changes with that. I'd also mention, because it has to be in the board minutes, that we're putting in the elementary, the ESSER Relief 2 fund program assurances. They were in the last packet for ESSER 3. And this packet has the ESSER 2 assurances and what's called the GEPA, which is just a bit of an overview about the work that we're doing in the district. So I just we need to have that in the notes for Shay.
Thank you. Anything else with regard to leadership team updates? All right, let's move on. There is no unfinished business on the agenda, so move on to committee updates. Finance and Facilities met last Thursday. Aaron, do you want to talk about what we did?
Absolutely. So we met last Thursday at 4 p.m. at the SAU office. We approved the minutes from the previous meeting, and we talked about the ESSER funding and construction with possible alterations from the original design. Marinese was on Zoom with us. They gave us a look at the new designs possible new designs. We asked a bunch of questions and we gave them a bunch of things to go look at and bring to the board meeting, the next board meeting to answer for the entire group. After that, we discussed possible softball field donation. There's more questions on that will be followed up on future finance facilities meetings. Then we talked about the track fundraising update from their first meeting. They're having a second meeting on the 20th of September, October. And they'll be continuing that work to set that program up. Basically, they're gonna take this time this fall to gather the information they need and everything that they need to proceed with the fundraising and start the fundraising at the first of the year. After that, we talked a little bit about the Doug Ashe banner for the baseball fields and the possible, what do you call it, christening or dedication, possible dedication there. More to follow on that. We also talked a little about SAU usage, including all the schedules for the various rooms and of the SAU.
Questions?
Did you, so
Yeah.
here's the baseball field dedication is supposed to be October 16th. That is baseball. Yeah, Lebanon High School, Saturday, October 16th at 11 a.m.
Oh, okay.
Really?
I was invited on Facebook. So I made sure to take a picture. So I guess I knew we asked, but yeah,
What time was that at?
11 a.m.
That's this Saturday?
Yeah. We talked about it last time, right? I knew I was.
So who arranged it? They didn't ever contact anyone at the
It
school?
must be going through has Dana talked to you about it?
No.
So it's going through the high school and Mike?
So we probably reserve the space, but that's not going.
Do you want to be our representative to Facebook?
No.
Seems to be, one of our, oh, never mind. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions relating to finance and facilities? Policy. Kristen's not here. We did meet, I guess I can report, we did meet day before yesterday, went through a number of the policies that we didn't get to go through in September. And we'll be bringing a number of revised and new policies to the board at the next board meeting. EC meets next Monday. Personnel and negotiations are working. Does PNN have anything to report, anything to say?
No, I mean, it's just normal course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Student Wellness Advisory Committee met on Wednesday, the 13th. Any more information to share on that?
Is that Kristen?
Oh, that's Kristen.
Mhm.
Okay, I guess we'll find out at the next meeting. Harvard Area Career Technical Center next meeting is in November. Area Committee is coming up in a little over 2 weeks, a little under 2 weeks, I guess it is, here. We have reps to that, but anyone else who has a spare hour that wants to come and they're welcome to join us. And the City School Joint Task Force is meeting next Thursday here. And I see the agenda and supporting docs for that have been sent out. New business, we've already done the Sem Hill discussion. We now need to have discussion and action on the acceptance of the $10,000 donation from the Byrne Foundation for the high school wrestling team. May I have a motion to accept that donation, please? Moved by Lillian. second by MJ. Discussion, comments, questions, MJ?
I just had a question. I mean, it seems like every year they donate 10,000 to the wrestling program. So what is this used for and why do we keep graciously accepting these donations for $10,000?
I can have Mike Stone speak to it. He's also going to be at the next board meeting.
Well, that's not the only thing they give us money for.
No, they give us lots of money. I'm
Yeah.
very thankful for all the money they give us. I'm just wondering why we continually need to fund the wrestling program through this avenue or what they're using the money for.
Right, we can ask Mike to address that. Any other discussion of the motion? Now, let's have a show of hands to pass the motion. Unanimous, 8-0. Future agenda items. Are there any board member recommendations or requests for additions to the agenda? You can do that at other times as well, but if there's anything tonight that we'd like to get on the agenda, now is a good time to mention it. Not seeing any. Important dates and district announcements. Delegate Assembly is Saturday, the 16th. Next board meeting is Wednesday, October 27th, 2 weeks from tonight. Our hopefully not day-long budget session is Saturday, November 20th here, beginning at 8 o'clock sharp. And the other dates for various committees have already been listed in the agenda. Is there any other business? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Stephen Dilfer, second by MJ, all in favor? Unanimous. Done.